Today is Tuesday, the 12th of June, and this morning what we're going to do is finish up our last little segment on the section on learning. If you have not logged into Site Portal in your browser, I'm going to ask you to please do so because I'm going to point you to something to take a look at this morning that is a video, and again, they don't play well if I try to do that via an application share from my end to your end. So just make sure you're logged into Site Portal as we get rolling here. What I want to do is just review some of the big points on operant conditioning, which is what we were talking about yesterday. We'll talk about observational learning. That's the major focus in the final segment on learning, and then we'll move away from learning and start talking about memory this morning as well. Okay? So yesterday, as we worked our way through the section on operant conditioning, what were we focused in on? Well, we were focused in on two forms of reinforcement. These are two ways to increase the frequency of the behavior, right? A positive reinforcement scenario is one in which a response is strengthened by the subsequent presentation of a stimulus, right? You give a good book report, your classmates applaud. That leads to an increase in the good book report presentation behavior on your part, okay? Negative reinforcement, a response is strengthened. Reinforcement always strengthens the behavior by the subsequent removal or avoidance of something that you don't like. Okay, you get rid of your headache by taking the Advil. Okay, the baby stops crying when you pick them up. Okay, the cell phone stops ringing when you answer it. Those are all negative reinforcement scenarios. In contrast, punishment is about ways to decrease the frequency of a behavior. Okay, so positive punishment, a response is weakened by the subsequent presentation of a stimulus. You kick your sibling, I present you with a scolding for doing so. Okay, the rat in the cage in the Skinner box scratches on the speaker and we shock him for doing so. Negative punishment sometimes is referred to as response cost, so you'll see this term a lot. Any kind of timeout scenario would be an example of response cost or negative punishment, where the response is weakened by the subsequent removal of a stimulus. So you kick your sibling, and instead of scolding you, what I do is I take away your favorite toy. You lose something, okay? You lose something in the context of negative punishment, all right? Any questions about those couple of slides? Those are essential for you to understand in this section on learning. I want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with those and confident about their mastery of that material. Okay. In addition to those forms of operant conditioning, we also talked about shaping. So that would be another big idea of the day yesterday, right? Looking at shaping, where we reward baby steps and we move you towards closer and closer approximations of that ultimate target behavior, right? There's something that we want you to do. We can train you as an animal to do relatively complex behaviors by rewarding you for each step that's moving towards that final target behavior, okay? We have talked about primary versus secondary reinforcers. So primary reinforcers are those that are directly biologically relevant, food, water, sex, etc. The secondary reinforcers, things like money, compliments, hugs, etc., applause, are things that are reinforcing via their repeated associations, their repeated pairings with those primary reinforcers. So we made that distinction as well, okay? Any of that stuff from yesterday. Again, more big ideas from our review of this material yesterday. Okay. Then we got into reinforcement schedules. We finished up with this slide, I believe, talking about ratio schedules. Ratio schedules are those where the reinforcement is being given based on the number of times that you do something, right? So I have to do a behavior X number of times before the reward is going to be given, versus interval schedules, which are not based on the number of times you do something, but instead on how long it has been since you were last rewarded, right? So I said I'm on a fixed interval schedule as a professor here at SDSU. If I do my job as a professor during the previous month, on the first day of the next month, I will get paid for doing so. Okay, so those are good examples of interval schedules and fixed interval in that case. Okay. Questions on the reinforcement schedules at all? Remember, we had the practice exercises on Site Portal on the Course Materials tab for you to review to make sure you get your head around these as well. Okay, so make use of those. All right, let's do a couple polling questions. Let's see. I think I have 3 that I could do here that we haven't done yet. So let's do a couple of these just to kind of get the juices flowing this morning before we move on and finish up with the section on observational learning. So check out this one first, guys. Positive reinforcement blanks the rate of responding, whereas negative reinforcement blanks the rate of responding. Is it 2 increases, 2 decreases, 1 increase, and 1 decrease? Which way do these things go in terms of their effects on the rate of responding? That is the likelihood that you will engage in that behavior. Okay, so choose one of those and click the old submit button. And then we'll take a look at where you guys are at with those in just a bit here. So again, for those of you just signing in now, I have asked you guys to make sure you're logged into Site Portal within your browser, because I'm going to point you to something that includes some video on Site Portal about observational learning, and I just can't push that to you cleanly via the app share tool here in Wimba. All right, I'm up to 82% responses. I'm going to give you the remaining 6 or 8 people here a couple more seconds to wrap this one up. All right, good enough. Let's take a look, guys, here. So what goes on here with positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement? Well, I've said a couple times now, reinforcement always leads to an increase in the frequency of the behavior. So it's a double increase answer here, which most of you guys got correct. Okay, negative reinforcement does not decrease the rate of responding. Okay, using the example yesterday of buckling your seatbelt to make the beeping sound go away, that's negative reinforcement. That increases the rate of that responding because you've learned a way to terminate that thing that you don't like. Okay, all right. Questions on that one? All right, let's take another look at another polling question here. Which of the following is not an example of punishment? So which of these is not punishment? Your parents take away your telephone privileges because you failed your algebra test. Your coach makes you run extra sprints after practice because you showed up late for practice. The referee of your soccer match presents you with a yellow card when you slide tackle an opponent from behind, or you take medication to get rid of a migraine headache. Which of those is not an example of punishment? All right, we've got a little more than 3/4 of you giving this one a shot here. So we have to look at those and figure out whether they're punishment or reinforcement, and then find the one that is correct here. That's pretty much everybody, so let's take a look. So which of these is not an example of punishment? Very good. It's the last one. That's the one we've talked about numerous times as our negative reinforcement example. Okay, tell me in the chat box. Number 1 there, is that positive punishment or negative punishment? That's negative punishment. What's the key word or words there that help you realize that that's a negative punishment example? Takes away. Very good. How about number 2? Is that positive punishment or negative punishment? That's positive punishment because what is he presenting you with? He's running some extra sprints. He's giving you that. Okay. How about number 3? Positive punishment or negative punishment? The referee presents you with a yellow card. That's positive again because of the word presents, right? So you do this behavior, I present you with this, to lead to a decrease in the frequency of that behavior. Okay. Any questions on that one at all? Almost had everybody get it right. That's pretty darn good. Let's do one last polling question here, and then we'll move into the section on observational learning. The points that you were given for responding correctly to this question are good examples of what? Primary reinforcers, secondary reinforcers, tertiary reinforcers, or pity points. Which one of those is what these points are? Primary, secondary, tertiary, or pity points. All right, that's almost everybody. I've got 4 stragglers. You guys have another 10 seconds, and then we're going to take a look at our results. All right, thank you. Let's see how many of you guys are getting this one right. Almost 70% of you saying these are secondary reinforcers, right? Because they're not directly biologically relevant in terms of food, water, sex, etc. Okay? They're connected in with those things because of its connection with some kind of approval, some kind of shaping of your behavior to focus your attention, to study the material, to get these kinds of questions right. Okay? So these are secondary reinforcers, the points here. Any questions on that at all? All right, cool. Let's go to our final segment on observational learning. So if I bounce all the way up to the top of our list of slides here, we had this slide talking about the 3 major forms of learning, and now we've beaten classical conditioning and operant conditioning into the ground. We've got to focus here in this final segment on observational learning, right? Learning via imitation. So sometimes you'll hear this called modeling, or sometimes you'll hear this called social learning theory, with the idea being that we learn to do certain things because we see other people doing them, and we basically go and mimic their behavior, right? So you could think of things like being an apprentice, learning how to be, I don't know, a blacksmith, or learning how to be a waiter or waitress, or learning how to be a brain surgeon, okay? At some point, learning how to be a pilot. You're going to be observing people who are really good at that. You're going to learn all the tips and tricks, and then hopefully go and imitate, recreate their behavior yourself, okay? So we'll talk about observational learning in this final segment of the section on learning. So observational learning, according to research that's been done by Albert Bandura up at Stanford University, involves 4 steps. Bandura basically lays out these 4 steps that are necessary for observational learning to unfold. He comes upon these 4 steps based on his research that he did, one of the most famous studies really in all psychology, called the Bobo doll study. I'm not making that up. It's actually the name of the study. Okay, we'll look at the Bobo doll videos in just a second here. Okay, Bandura says that in order for observational learning to unfold, number 1, you have to be paying attention to the model's behavior. The model is the person that you're watching. Okay, so if you are learning, for example, to be a plumber, you're going to need to be focused in on what that plumber person is doing when they're dealing with the problems in that sink or that toilet or whatever the case might be. Okay? If you're not paying attention, you're never going to be able to recreate, to mimic, to imitate what you saw that person do. Number 2, the segue into memory is really this one. We're going to talk about memory after we finish up with observational learning. We need to be able to retain what we saw in memory. So we pay attention to what was going on. We remember what we saw because it's in our memory. Number 3, we have to have the capacity to do what we saw done, right? We need to be physically capable of reproducing that behavior. Okay? We need to be able to go and do what we saw, right? So this is where you or I might come up short in terms of recreating things that we see in the highlights from an NBA game, right? So you see LeBron or Kevin Durant take off from the free throw line and dunk it on a fast break. Well, you know, I watched it. I paid attention. I can remember what I saw, but I don't think that's happening for me. I'm not going to be able to recreate that behavior because I'm not physically capable of doing so, right? I'm going to need I'm going to need some kind of help, a ladder, right? Maybe some kind of bungee cord to fling me through there. Maybe a trampoline. That would help me get that done, right? So you have to be physically capable of doing it. And number 4, says Bandura, is the need to be motivated to display the behavior. We have to sort of see something in it. There has to be some kind of motivational fuel to get me there. Okay, maybe I see, for example, this person get applauded for doing that behavior, get rewarded in some way, right? With one of those secondary reinforcers that we were just talking about. Okay, how does Bandura come up with this set of steps that are part and parcel to observational learning unfolding the way that we would like it? He comes upon these based on his study that's called the Bobo doll study. So in the 1960s, Bandura is up at Stanford, and what he does is he does this study where he has an adult model come in. That's what's depicted up above here in the first panel. We're going to see the video of this in just a few minutes when I direct you guys to it. So this woman comes in dressed like, you know, your Sunday school teacher or your nice little old next door neighbor here, and she is going to beat the heck out of Bobo. Here's the Bobo doll. So Bobo is this blow-up doll here, not an appropriate blow-up doll, but a blow-up doll that you punch. He kind of flings to the ground. What happens after he hits the ground? He pops right back up. Okay. Children are brought in to observe this woman interact in this aggressive and pretty violent way with this Bobo doll. And then Bandura has them randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions in terms of the consequences for that woman's behavior. So here's how it sort of connects back in to operant conditioning. Group 1 sees the woman get rewarded for beating up on the Bobo doll in that way. They tell her, you did a great job. You're one of the best Bobo doll beater-uppers that we've ever had. Well done. Here's your reward. Okay. Group 2 sees the woman do the same exact set of behaviors and being aggressive and violent towards the Bobo doll, and they actually will see her get punished for engaging in those aggressive behaviors. Okay, that's condition 2 in the study. Third condition, you need a control group, as we talked about in the section on research methods. And they see her do the behaviors, but they don't actually see any kind of consequence for this woman in terms of what happens afterwards. Which group, group 1, group 2, or group 3, do you think ends up being the most violent when they go in the room with the Bobo doll? Which kids are the most aggressive? The first group where they saw her get rewarded, second group where they saw her get punished, or the third group where they saw no consequence? I see a lot of people betting on number 1, and you guys are correct. Okay, so this is one of the more famous studies in all of psychology because it really illuminates for us some of the mechanisms here via which observational learning unfolds. Okay. What's interesting, too, is that the kids don't just go in and do exactly what they saw, but they sort of do behaviors that are consistent with what they saw. So some of what you'll see in the video is an exact replication of behaviors that the woman engaged in her aggressive and violent behavior towards Bobo. And then other times the kids will pick up kind of a new thing and do something that looks a little bit different from what they saw her do directly. Okay. So what I'd like you guys to do is just bounce on over into your browser for a minute or two here and go to your Site Portal site. And this is going to be some material, yet again, on the Course Materials tab. So you log into Site Portal, you click Course Materials. Under the Student Resources drop-down menu, I want you to click on the Concepts in Action. And this is our learning chapter, so it's Chapter 7. So Course Materials, Concepts in Action, Learning, Chapter 7. Okay, and I click Go. What you'll see down at the bottom of these Concepts in Action is the Bobo doll experiment. Okay, Bandura's work here. So if you click on that, you will be given that learning object within your window. And it'll take a little bit of time to load in here because it's a little bit heavy in terms of the different videos that are embedded within this learning object. So give it a minute to load up. Mine is finally at about 90% now. And now we're fully loaded. The first screen is just giving you the background, and I've sort of told you that story already about observational learning, about modeling. Okay? It says down the bottom here, on the next screens, you will view some video clips from Bandura's original experiment. Okay? Your task will be to observe and identify the specific behaviors modeled by the adult, and then match those with the behaviors exhibited by the children. Here's what you're going to do. Screen number 2 will show you the adult model, the woman dressed in the teacher's outfit there, beating up on Bobo. Screen 3 will show you the little boy going in with Bobo, and then screen 4 will show you the little girl. So just go through each of those next 3 panels, 2, 3, and 4, and watch the videos here to give you a flavor for what this experiment was all about and what the kids saw and then what the kids actually went in and did. So I'm going to do the same thing myself right now. Let's take a few minutes, take a look at this, and then when we come back into the WIMA classroom, we can discuss our reactions and see what you guys thought about this. All right. See you guys in just a bit. All right, as you guys come back into the WIMA classroom, hit that check mark to let me know you're back. I'll give you guys another minute or so to gather up here. How about that sweet little princess beating the Bobo doll with another doll and then jumping on top of him in her Sunday best dress there? All right, we got more than half of you guys here. So it gives you a nice flavor for this mimicking, this imitation that goes on via observational learning, right? A nicely designed study. Again, like I said, one of the more famous studies in psychology. In the textbook, I think, even talks about how Bandura still now, gets upgrades when he checks into a hotel because the person working at the desk recognizes him. He's the Bobo doll guy, and now he gets, a suite in the nicest part of the hotel. They got a little story about that on page 320 of the textbook as well. So just wanted to give you a flavor for what that study looked like and how it illuminates what it does here about observational learning. Any questions or comments about what you saw in there at all? All right. What I want to do, Kelly, go ahead. I'm sorry, I missed you there for a second. I was looking over onto my second machine here, which is a little temperamental this morning. Yeah, so basically, in terms of differences, they didn't find big differences between boys and girls. And what I think what's most interesting, Kelly, is it's not necessarily just a copy and paste kind of imitation, right? So the little girl starts doing things beyond what she saw the woman do, right? The little boy holds up what looks like kind of a gun to Bobo. Well, the woman model didn't do that, right? And the woman model didn't beat Bobo with a doll like the little girl did. So it's not like we're programming kids via observational learning to do very specific behaviors. We're kind of putting them in that environment, right? We're putting, like, you're going to do some aggressive and violent things because that's what you're being exposed to here, right? And boys and girls will show some differences, certainly. We know that boys on average are more aggressive than girls are. But in his study, no giant differences between the genders. Why should we even care about this, by the way? Well, the final slide talks about the connection between media violence and observational learning. What does observational learning have to say in terms of exposure to media violence and aggressive behavior, right? Are these two variables connected with each other, right? So exposure to media violence seems to be predictive of aggressive behavior. Okay, I get that. It's a correlational study, and we know that correlation doesn't mean causation, right? So especially for boys, piggybacking on Kelly's question here, we see this stepwise increase in the likelihood of your engaging in aggressive or violent behavior as a function of your media exposure at time one. That is, how much are you involved with media violence? That could be video games, it could be TV shows, different things like that, movies, etc. Okay, even more obviously for boys than for girls, we find this connection. Now, is this a causal connection? Well, unless we did a true experiment, as we learned in the section on research methods, we can't infer causation from a correlational study. So what other possible third variables or confounds could be present? Well, media violence is associated with aggressive behavior. We could talk about things like other family environment variables. Is there parental monitoring? Are parents aware of what the child is doing and what kinds of games they're playing and what kinds of shows and movies they're watching? Okay. What other kinds of stressors are present in the child's life? Okay. Biologically, what's going on with the child's brain? If we have a frontal lobe that's still maturing, okay, and will continue to do so into their 20s, and the frontal lobe inhibits impulsive behavior, which might come in the form of aggressive or violent behavior, that could be another factor, right? So the idea here I want to sort of sneak in at the end about observational learning is that the world that we live in is a multivariate world. And in English, that means there are lots and lots of factors. Remember our discussion about third variables when we talked about correlational studies. Okay? There are lots of reasons why kids who are exposed to more media violence might be more aggressive. Okay? They might be predisposed to seek out those games in the first place because they're already aggressive. Okay? So that's the directionality issue. We don't know which way to draw those arrows. I think the take-home message is we should be aware. This is why you should care about what your sons and daughters, your nieces and nephews are doing, who they're hanging out with, what kinds of activities they're involved with, because we know that observational learning plays a big role in shaping their behavior. There's no doubt about that. Okay? So for better or worse, kids will imitate, they will mimic things that they're exposed to on a daily basis. Okay? Any final questions on observational learning, or really at this point, before we turn the page, on any of these three major forms of learning? Remember, this is the biggest chunk on test 2 next Wednesday. Now only 8 days away, right? Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning. Do you feel like you got your head around all that stuff? If you do, that's great. If you don't, it'll be good to practice a lot with the learning curve activities to get your head around these things, because these are important topics as we move forward. All right. Looks like we don't have any questions. So let me grab my slides for the section on memory. So we're going to turn the page here and move into the section on memory. Let me grab the learning outcomes for you guys from the syllabus here. So got to copy those, paste those over for you. So I'll type in the chat box, memory learning outcomes. So as we move into this chapter on memory, I want you to be able to do. Pasted those guys in, and here they are. Distinguish between explicit memory and implicit memory. Distinguish between declarative memory and procedural memory. Describe the operation of short-term memory. Describe the operation of long-term memory. Discuss something called the serial position effect. And then 6 through 9. We'll probably get through the first 4 or 5 this morning with a goal for tomorrow of finishing up the section on memory. If we're able to do that, then we'll be in position to sort of stay on schedule with respect to what's spelled out in the syllabus for you. So we'll finish memory tomorrow, and then Thursday do a segment on intelligence. That's probably going to be mostly a one-day thing on Thursday. Next week on Monday and Tuesday, we would then cover development, and then test number 2, again, comes up next Tuesday. Okay, that's kind of the plan here as we go forward. So the memory slides begin with this one. And what we're going to talk about initially is different models of memory. Okay, so I'll type in here on the slide, memory models. Memory models. Okay, memory models is going to be about ways that we think about memory. Okay, ways that researchers who study memory sort of describe memory use, memory content, how we process things in memory. We'll talk about something called the modal memory model, where we'll talk about short-term memory and long-term memory. Okay, we will definitely get into a discussion of something called the serial position effect. Okay, that is, how does the position of an item in a long list of items impact your ability to remember items from that list? Do you remember some things better than other things? Okay, we'll get into a demonstration probably, probably not by the end of today, but probably at the beginning of tomorrow's class session, about something called chunking. That doesn't sound very attractive. It sounds a little scary. Chunking is something that we do and make use of to make more efficient use of the limited capacity of our short-term memory. Right? If I read you a list of 30-some items, you're probably not going to remember all of them, but actually with chunking, you can remember more than you otherwise would. Okay, so we'll talk about chunking. We'll do a little demonstration about that. And we'll talk about something called levels of processing theory. And levels of processing theory is a model that looks at how does the degree to which we think about and process information impact our likelihood of recalling that information later on. We'll do a really cool demonstration of that. Okay. Then we'll get into a discussion of what can go wrong with memory. So I'll call that what goes wrong. Okay. What can go wrong with memory in terms of forgetting, in terms of having to study for 3 or 4 tests at the same time and running out of space in short-term memory, even things like amnesia. Okay, we'll talk about that. We will take a little look tomorrow at a small piece of the Finding Nemo movie, right? You guys remember Dory? Which fish was Dory in Finding Nemo? I know this is probably from your childhood now. You guys are so young in my class. She was the blue one. What was her problem with memory? You guys remember what was wrong with Dory? She had short-term memory problems. She basically couldn't hold information in her memory at all, and she was forgetting things like Wallaby Way. Look at Kelly just showing off her memory for Finding Nemo. So we will take a look at that, assuming that clip is still up on YouTube, which it was the last time I did this. Okay. At the very end, we will review the biology of memory. So there we'll be looking at what brain structures are involved with memory formation and retrieval of information from memory and so forth. So that's kind of the lay of the land. That's our organizational scheme here as we move our way through the section on memory. So let's start with these memory models. I've got it looks like about 4 of them to review with you. These are just basically ways of thinking about memory that memory researchers have laid out for us so that we can make sense of, most of the time, things that happen to us on an everyday or at least once a week kind of basis. So let's explain some of these memory models. Let's start with a review of 2 different types of memory use. Okay, memory use. So the memory use categorization scheme here really is going to answer the question how we get the information out of memory. Okay, memory use, or how we get the information out. When we try to remember something and we make an effort to recall something, we're going to call that explicit memory, and that's an easy one to remember because, ironically enough, here the mnemonic device is 2 E's, Explicit memory involves effort, so we have two E's to help me remember that, right? So if I said to you right now, and you don't need to type it in the name into the chat box, but you could, what was the name of your first grade teacher? Okay, think about that for a second. What was the name of your first grade teacher? Do you feel yourself making an effort right now to recall his or her name? You're experiencing what's going on with explicit memory, right? It involves effort. In contrast, implicit memory doesn't involve effort, right? If I ask you right now what your name is, you're probably not going to sit there and say, oh, dude, let me think for a second, right? Or if you look down and you see that your shoe is untied, you could probably sit there, retie your shoe. In fact, I'll do that right now as I'm sitting here, okay? And do that without trying to remember exactly how to do that. I'm still talking to you right now about implicit memory, and I'm tying my shoe at the same time. Talk about multitasking, right? The recollection of how to tie my shoe is a nice example of implicit memory. It doesn't involve any effort on my part, okay? If I asked you the names of your siblings, probably wouldn't take a lot of effort on your part unless you got like 26 brothers and sisters. You would just rattle off their names relatively quickly, okay? So these two types of memory, in terms of these memory models, are describing the process that we use to retrieve information from memory. Sometimes it involves effort. If I were to ask you, what is the capital of North Carolina? Okay, that's probably going to involve effort. Anybody know that right off the top of their head? That's explicit memory. It is Raleigh. You are correct. Okay? Implicit memory, in contrast, just automatically these things pop up. Okay? Without any explicit use of any effort. Make sense? Everybody see the difference there between explicit memory and implicit memory? So this is answering, again, the question of how is it that you're getting the information out of memory. Okay? What we're going to do with that now is cross it with what is it that you're pulling out of memory. We're going to talk now about a second model that describes memory content. And as I'm suggesting here, the memory content issue is answering the question of what is it that you're pulling out of memory. Okay? What is the material? What is the information? Well, memory researchers make a distinction between what they call declarative memories and procedural memories. Declarative memories are memories for facts and events. That's sort of the overarching category here, right? Declarative memory is memory for facts and events. You can subdivide declarative memory into episodic memory and semantic memory, right? Episodic memory is memory for personal events. So again, we've got two E's. Episodic memory for personal events. This is the autobiographical stuff, okay? So I'll type that in here. Autobiographical memory, right? This is memory for the stories from your life, okay? So if I ask you to remember your 8th grade graduation for a minute, okay, that's an episodic memory. If I ask you to remember your brother or your sister's wedding, okay, those are episodic memories. If you ask me to remember the birth of my first son, okay, those are episodic memories, personal events. If they're important events like that that are near and dear to your heart, right? Episodic memories. They're facts and events. They're personal ones. More generic information is housed in what we call semantic memory. So again, we're subdividing declarative memory into episodic personal memories, and now the more generic semantic memories. Memory for facts, like the capital of North Carolina, and the basic meanings of words and concepts. So I would use the word generic to describe these sorts of semantic memories, right? So if I ask you, what was the name of the 22nd president of the U.S.? I don't know if anybody knows that off the top of their head. Probably going to involve explicit memory, right? That's the memory use. That's how you're getting it out, and you pull up that name, and you say, okay, here it is. Okay, semantic memory, memory for facts and the basic meanings of words and concepts. So semantic memory, if you want to keep this straight in your mind, semantic memory is what would be contained in a dictionary or an encyclopedia. Okay? And there's actually some pretty interesting research. I think I've linked this up in the external links for this memory chapter about how things like Google are changing the demands on us in terms of our semantic memories. Because on some level, it's not as important as it used to be to be able to remember all those various little factoids. Because how quickly can you guys find out who the 22nd president was? Ready? Go. Go find it out. Let's see how quickly we get an answer. If you don't know, just off the top of your head. Somebody's Googling it. It pops up right away. And the person's name was what? I'm assuming somebody's looking it up for us, because I'm not doing it. And I didn't look it up before class. I just picked a random number. The 22nd president of the U.S. was, come on, guys, help me out, Grover Cleveland. There you go. Did you know that off the top of your head? How did you get the information? You Googled it, okay? So think about that. I mean, here's the intersection of technology and memory, right? We're less beholden to trying to remember all this stuff, right? These inert, disconnected facts, what I like to call factoids, right? Because you can get all that stuff very, very quickly. I'm not saying you don't need to know things anymore, but it's less important that you clutter up your semantic memory with all that stuff because it's so easily retrievable now, okay? And there is an interesting link. I'll grab it for you on the break and throw it into the chat box in case you're curious to see about recent research about the effects of Google on memory and memory processing. In contrast, down below here, we also could talk about procedural memories, and that's why I did the tying your shoe example previously on purpose, right? It's for memories for how to do things. So procedural memory is basically memory about behaviors. It's memory about skills, okay? How to tie your shoe, how to juggle, how to play the piano, how to play tennis, how to swing a baseball bat. All of these systems here, this second model of memory is about memory content. Again, answering the question, what is it that you're pulling out of memory? Okay? So in some of these cases, in the examples we've been doing together, I'm making you, for example, make an explicit use of episodic memory, presumably, when I ask you to name your first grade teacher. Okay? I'm making you make an explicit use of semantic memory when I ask you to recall the name of the 22nd president or the capital of North Carolina. Okay? Something like that. Procedural memories can be explicit or implicit, right? So procedural memories, if it's an explicit memory, it involves effort, right? I'm trying to recall exactly how I saw the plumber whom I observed yesterday do what he did to fix the sink. Okay? I'm trying to recall that. Versus the implicit procedural memory was me sitting here tying my shoe without thinking about, make the first bunny ear, make the second bunny ear, wrap the one around, and that kind of thing. Okay? So we can sort of cross the previous slide, which had two types of memory use, explicit and implicit, with these different types of memory content from this slide. Okay? All right, let me stop there for a second. Any questions, any confusion about these first two ways of sort of slicing and dicing memory based on memory use or memory content? Make sense? Okay. Let's do a quick polling question about this. I've got this one. Yeah, let's do both of these. These are fun. How about this one? Your recollection of how to use your clicker, if you had a clicker course, is an example of what type of memory, whereas your recollection of the events from your first day of class this semester is an example of what type of memory. Okay? So how to use a clicker versus the stuff that happened on your first day of class this summer session. Which is which for that one? So choose one of those and submit it. It's a double-barreled question for you there, just to make things a little more challenging. All right, 76% of our respondents are chiming in and playing along already. And that's pretty much everybody, so thanks for that, guys. Let's take a look. How to use your clicker sounds like a procedural memory, and everybody agreed to that. The question then becomes whether the second one is semantic or episodic. Recollection of the events from your first day of class this semester, those personal events, those episodic memories. So most of you guys are right on this one. The correct choice is C. procedural and episodic. Any questions about that at all? Make sense? Okay, let's take a look at one more of these, and then we'll go back and talk some more about a couple other models of memory. Remembering how to solve a jigsaw puzzle without any conscious recollection that you can do so best illustrates which type of memory. You just start putting this puzzle together without even really thinking about it. Is that explicit memory, flashbulb memory, implicit memory, or sensory memory? That shouldn't be too hard. We'll do a couple more slides about a couple other models of memory. I think we'll do another polling question, and then we'll take a break before we do 2 demonstrations in our last half hour or so this morning. My second computer is so darn temperamental. Not getting a whole lot of cooperation over there today. And one of the lights in my office blew up this morning, too, so that's cool. All right, 80% of you are in, now 90% of you, so let's take a look at the results from this one about solving this puzzle without even really thinking about it. That's implicit memory, right? Because explicit memory involves effort to do so, figuring out what goes where. Anything that's sort of automatic, maybe that's a way to think about implicit memory, that these things happen sort of automatically. Tying my shoe without thinking about it. You probably would get on a bicycle today, and even if you hadn't ridden a bike for a couple of years, you probably would just start pedaling and going. Okay? You don't sit there and say, okay, let me think about what I should do here to make this happen. Right? We just kind of go and do it. All right. Let's talk about a couple other models here of memory before we get ready to take a little break here. The third model of memory after memory use and memory content is this overview of memory processing. And I really like this pretty simple, straightforward depiction of memory in the lower right-hand side here, right? Memory involves moving from the encoding stage to the storage stage, and then ultimately, very often, to the retrieval stage as well. So encoding, first up, is when we initially process information such that inputting leads to a representation of that information in memory. Okay? So that's the way I like to think about encoding. It's the data entry stage in memory processing. Okay? It's when we're typing in the data into Excel. It's when we're typing the paper into Word. Okay? We're doing the data entry stage. We're encoding that information in the first place. Okay? Because obviously, if you want to be able to retrieve the information later on, you have to have encoded it in the first place, right? This is actually the very first place where things can go wrong with memory. What do I mean about encoding? Well, imagine you're at a party where somebody introduces you. Maybe it's the first week of school in the fall semester. And somebody introduces you to like 7 or 8 brand new people to you. Okay? And you get distracted in the midst of those introductions because your cell phone rings and it's your mom calling you and you're worried about what's going on and you get distracted. And you don't pay attention and consequently don't encode the names of the last 3 or 4 people who are being introduced to you. Okay? Now let's pretend that you encounter some of those people, maybe 2 or 3 of those 3 or 4 people, a day or 2 later. One of them comes walking over and says, "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" And you're like, "Hey, you," right? You don't really know their name. Did you actually forget anything in that case when you didn't encode the information in the first place? No, it's really not an issue of forgetting something. It's a lack of encoding in the first place. So sometimes this is really the first way that our memories can fail us. We're not really forgetting anything. It's that we never inputted any information to start with. Everybody see that? Okay. After we encode the information, we need to store it away. We need to be able to basically, to continue with this computer analogy, we need to be able to click the save button. Okay? We need to be able to save that information over onto the flash drive, onto the hard drive, whatever we're going to try to do here. Okay? So we retain that encoded material, that information over time. We store it away. We want to be able to go back to it and then hopefully click open, and that's what retrieval is going to be all about. Okay? When we open the document, okay, It's an Excel file, it's a Word document, whatever the case might be. We want to be able to open it up later on. So if we use that computer analogy all the way through, for encoding, storage, and retrieval, we could say encoding is the data entry stage, storage is when we click save, and retrieval is when we click open. Okay, we recover that stored information at some point in the future. Now, there are actually two different retrieval tasks that we can give you. We can give you a recall task, or we could give you a recognition task. Okay? A recall task is one where you're asked to just generate the items, for example, on a list on your own. So we're going to do a recall task after the break. Okay? What's going to happen is I'm going to read you guys a list of 18 words. When we get done those 18 words, I'm going to say to you, okay, now try to remember as many of those words as you can. That's a recall task where it's an open-ended situation, kind of like a short answer question or an essay would be, right? If I gave you an essay question that said, compare and contrast classical conditioning and operant conditioning, that's it. That's a recall task. No further information for you. Whereas a recognition retrieval task, in contrast, is one where you just have to pick the right answer from what's in front of you. Okay? So I could read you a list of 18 words and then slide a piece of paper in front of you that has 100 words on it and say, hey, circle the words that you just heard me say. Okay? Just like on a test, I could not give you a test question that says, in an essay form, compare and contrast classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Instead, I could ask you to analyze an example and select the right answer, where you have to recognize the correct answer, right? So if we want to make this simple and relate it to things that you deal with on an everyday basis as a student, we could say recall tasks are essays or short answer questions, whereas recognition tasks are things like multiple choice questions, okay? All right, questions on that in terms of this process where we go from encoding to storage to retrieval. Any of that confusing or not make sense to you at this point? You feel good there? All right. If you got it, tell me in the chat box you got it. MC stands for multiple choice, right? A multiple choice question is a recognition task because the correct answer is sitting there in front of you. You just need to be able to recognize it. Okay, thanks, guys, for all the got it there. My voice is already crapping out on day 2 of this 4-day week of yammering for 200 minutes a day, so got to try to hang in there. I'll grab a Halls during the break here and try to soothe my poor little throat. All right, last of the memory models, I promise, is this one called the modal memory model. The modal memory model says we basically have 3 different storage systems, if you will, within our memory system. We have a sensory memory store, a working memory store, and a long-term memory store. Sensory memory is actually the least important of these, but let me just introduce it here because you'll come upon it when you read the textbook and you'll need to be familiar with it for test questions. Okay? Sensory memory is the store in which we represent physical features of stimuli from our environment for a few seconds or less. It's ultra fleeting, ultra short-term memory. So we have, for example, iconic memory for visual stimuli, right? If we were sitting in a classroom together and I flashed the laser pointer up on the screen and I spun it around in a circle or an oval, it would appear as if there was a circle or an oval on the screen, when in fact there's not. What you're seeing is the trace of that stimulus in your environment as it goes around and around and around. You're seeing iconic memory in action, okay? Echoic memory is the analogous situation, sensory memory for auditory inputs, for auditory stimuli, okay? We're least interested, honestly, in sensory memory because it's just so short-term, so fleeting that it's not particularly important for how our memory system works and what we use on an everyday basis. It's sort of the screening that we do of incoming stimuli. In working memory, we have short-term memory. So technically speaking, short-term memory is sort of a subsystem, a subcategory within the working memory part of this modal memory model. I'm going to use the term short-term memory pretty exclusively. I won't really say working memory very often. Short-term memory has a limited capacity, right? If I read you a list of items and there were 50 items on that list. You're probably going to remember more than one, and you're probably going to remember fewer than 50 of those items. That's a lot of stuff to remember. So you bump up against this all the time, right? You bump up against the capacity of this short-term memory. Okay, that's part of one of our big demonstrations we'll do at the beginning of class tomorrow, which is about the limited capacity of short-term memory. Okay, I'm going to tell you about how many items on average we can fit in short-term memory. I'm not going to tell you here. I'm going to tell you after we do the little demo tomorrow. Okay, but you bumped up against that if someone read you a big long list of items to pick up at the supermarket, or if someone were to read you a really long string of digits. You're not going to be able to remember all of them. You're going to sort of run out of space, out of capacity here in short-term memory. And the information in short-term memory only lasts relatively briefly if you're not rehearsing that information. Okay? So if I did read you a list of items to pick up at the supermarket on the way home, and if I made it easy for you, made it alphabetical, and it was like apples, bananas, cookies, what the hell would D be? At the supermarket. Ding dongs. I don't know. E, eggs. Donuts. I like April's idea of donuts. Eggs. F, flounder, etc. Right? If you didn't practice those things and repeat those things to yourself, if you didn't try to rehearse those items, you're going to forget them. Trust me, relatively quickly. April's picking up donuts and French fries. Awesome. Okay, we should all go shopping with her. Finally, long-term memory has a relatively unlimited capacity. Okay, that's the good news, right? If we want to talk about long-term memories that are episodic memories, events from our lives, right? It's good that we can keep sticking new episodic memories in there when we meet new people or new, amazing events occur, right? The births of babies, weddings, and teams, our favorite team wins a championship. We have all this wonderful new stuff that occurs that we want to stick into our long-term memory store, these episodic memories. Okay, we don't run up against situations where we meet someone new. We're like, oh, it was fascinating meeting you, but I cannot recall your name in the future because I have reached the disk is full stage with my long-term memory. Okay, we don't experience that. We have this relatively unlimited capacity in this long-term memory. Okay? All right. Questions on any of those elements here in the modal memory model? That is just fun to say, the modal memory model. Any questions about any of that? Make sense? If you do, just raise your hand. I've got this figure on the next slide here, figure 8.2. It's not the most important figure ever, but I just wanted to point it out to you. It shows you this modal memory model in action. So where we're going from sensory inputs in our environment through sensory memory to short-term or working memory and ultimately into long-term memory. Okay, so it says a modified 3-stage processing model of memory. This is this Atkinson and Schriffrin model that you'll read about in the textbook. It's just depicting this with this example here of this angry face in the crowd. Okay, and how we sort of process that at the level of sensory memory, short-term memory, and then ultimately sometimes over into long-term memory. Okay? All right, let me ask you one more quick polling question just to see if you guys are following along here, and then we'll be ready for a little break, I promise. This one. When an eyewitness to a robbery is asked to describe what happened, tell me what happened, tell me what you saw, which test of memory is being used? Is that a recognition task, a rehearsal task, a recall task, or a relearning task? Okay? Describe the bad guy to me, for example. Okay? Is that recognition, rehearsal, recall, or relearning? All right. We are now at 58% of you responding. 81%. So you get another 15 seconds here for this one, folks, and then we'll take a look at the results. All right, thanks, guys. Let's take a look. See what percentage of you got this one right. We are looking at 82% of you saying recall. That is correct. That's a recall task. Why? Because you're being asked to describe what happened. What would be a recognition task? If you were an eyewitness to a robbery and the police had you do a recognition task, what would they ask you to do if we turn this recall task instead into a recognition task? They would give you a lineup, right? Guy standing in there, right? Or maybe 6 pictures on a piece of paper, and you had to circle the guy that was the one that you saw do it, okay? That would be a recognition task. Everybody see the difference there? So again, this is just helping you keep in mind when you're thinking about this encoding, storage, and retrieval model, right? We could say, okay, in this case, in talking about witnessing some kind of crime like that, a recall task would be if I sat down with the sketch artist, okay, and described the person to them, versus a recognition task would be if I was asked to ID the bad guy from a lineup, okay? In the first one, I'm being asked to recall, hey, describe the guy, how tall was he, what color was his hair, etc. Versus the recognition task, the baddie is there, right? He's in the lineup, pick him out, recognize him. Okay, similar to what we talked about before, where recall was an essay or a short answer question, and recognition, in contrast, was a more of a multiple choice kind of item. Okay? All righty. Any questions about that at all? All right, cool. You know what? We're in a good position here to take a little break. I've got 11:32 on my clock here. Let's resume at 11:40. That gives us a max of 30 minutes to do. I just want to do really 2 demonstrations before we finish up for today. And both of them will be geared towards showing us what this serial position effect is all about. Okay, so I'm just going to clear the slide for right now. Give you guys about 7 or 8 minutes to stretch and get a drink or whatever. We'll come back and we'll do the first of our demonstrations together. Okay? See you guys in just a bit. All right, guys, I'm back. Everybody ready to go? We're going to do a little demonstration together. I rather grandiosely label it Experiment 1, although it really shouldn't be labeled as an experiment because it's not an experiment. There's no random assignment or any of that stuff. We're gonna do a word list demonstration together. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is put down your pens or pencils, or if you're typing notes into a second computer or whatever you're doing here, get rid of anything that will help you keep track of what I'm going to read to you. So I'm going to clear the slide here, and I'm going to read a list of words to you guys. And after I'm done reading a list of words to you, I will ask you to try to recall those words. Okay? All right, here we go. Here's our list of words in our first demonstration. House, table, planet, lion, mint, calendar, print, dust, rose, drawer, refrigerator, maple, help, monument, plastic, band, basket, towel. All right, take a minute or so to try to recall as many of those words as you can, and I'll let you guys know when time is up. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, that's been about a minute. What I'm going to show you now is the list of words, and I want you to come up with, first of all, a grand total of how many words you came up with from this list of 18 words. Okay, so total it up, and then you can use the chat box to tell me how many of the words out of 18 you remembered correctly. So I'll give you guys a minute or two to come up with your total. Use the chat box to sort of report back to us about how well you did here with this list. We started with house, table, and planet, and we ran all the way through band, basket, and towel. You can just send your chat to the main room so everybody can see your totals. If you don't want to tell us your total, you don't have to tell us. I'm just curious to see some of the numbers as they pour in. Oh, forgot to enable chat. Duh. Thanks. There you go. Now you can put them in there. 12, 12, 11, 4, 7, 8, 10, 12, 7, 9, 8, 7, 9, 5. Alejandro got 12. Kelly got 7. April's got 14. That's about as many as I saw on that list. Let's give you guys another little bit here to finish up. Alexandra had 8. David had none because he had technical difficulty. Sorry about that. 5 for Benedict. Okay. So we saw probably a low of 5 or so. I think the highest that I saw as I scrolled through here was 14. Yeah, April was 14. That's because she's eating all those donuts and what was the other thing you were getting at the store? French fries, right? Oh, it's all about the donuts and French fries. Did anybody remember any words that I did not say? Did you type in or write down any words that I didn't say on my list from house, table, planet, all the way through band, basket, and towel? I see cow. I see cable. I see duck, cat. Okay, so words related to things that are on the list, or words that sound like words that are on the list. Okay, here's what I want to ask you more specifically, just to be clear here. Let's ask you what percentage of you guys remembered certain specific words. So let's do some quick polling here about house. Did you remember the word house? That's all I'm going to ask you. I'm going to go through these really quickly. So quickly tell me yes or no whether you remembered house. So click yes or no, click submit. Once I get more than 3/4 of you guys responding, we're going to bounce to the next one. Okay, good. For house, what percentage of you guys remembered that correctly? It's about 81%. Okay, let's go to the next one. Table. That was the second of these 18 words. Did you remember the word table? Yes or no? Again, once I get 75% of you responding, I'm going to move on. Okay, thank you. So we are at 81% for house. We are at 60% for table. Planet was the third word. Let's take a look at that one. Did you remember that? All right, good. Thanks for chiming in on that one. There are obviously no right or wrong answers to these. I'm just trying to gather some data from you guys. Planet, we are at 71%. So somewhere between 60% and 80% of you getting the first three words right. Let's go to the middle two words. Those words were rose and drawer. Did you remember rose? Quickly yes or no and submit. Cool. What do you think is going to happen here? That number has dropped now down to about 40%. Okay, so for the first three, we are averaging about 70%. Now we're at 40% for rose. The other of the two middle words was drawer. Let's see what happens here for the word drawer. How many of you guys remember that? And we'll take a look here. For drawer, we were at 40%. For rose, for drawer, we're 37%. We can round that to say for the first three words, we were around 70%. For the middle two words, we were around 40%. How about the last three words? Band, basket, and towel. Did you remember band? And this is obviously complicated by internet connection and how clearly you can hear me based on my voice dropping in and out sometimes, I know, during these sessions. But let's just take a look here. 23% of you remembered band. How about basket? Did you remember that one? Good. Thank you. We've got one more to do. I promise not to beat this into the ground too much. Now we're jumping up to 47% for that penultimate next to last word. And the final word was towel. Last three were band, basket, and then towel. Did you remember towel? All right, let's take a look at that one. And that one came in at around 70%. All right, so for those last three, we saw a progression from 23 to 47 to then 69% for the final word towel. So let's go back to the list again so we can look at where we were and what this is about. Here are the words. Okay, again, house, table, planet, lion, all the way through band, basket, and towel. We remembered these first three. If I were to average those out, at around 70% or so. These middle two, rows and drawer, we put a little box around those. We were around 40% correct remembering those guys. And then band, basket, and towel I'm going to put in separately. Band, we were at 23%. Basket, we were at 47%. And then towel, finally, we were at 69%. Okay. So it's interesting to see the pattern here in the results for this first demonstration. You guys are pretty good at remembering these guys over here, band, basket, house, table, and planet, those first three words. Tell me in the chat box if you think you've got an explanation as to why you remembered house, table, and planet so well. In fact, 81% of you remember the word house. Probably the best recollection of any of the words on the entire list. Okay? How did you remember house so well? We heard you really concentrated. Okay, so you were concentrating. What else were you doing with it? I'm betting a lot of you were doing something as I went through all the rest of the words. I was reading them every couple of seconds. Kelly was repeating them. You were doing rehearsal. Okay, so the explanation for the enhanced recall of those words at the beginning of the list was you were rehearsing them, right? You're probably sitting there going, house, table, planet, line, house, table, planet, line, house, table, planet, line. And a lot of people were thinking about relating words. And sometimes in a 500-student class, I will have students that remember all 18 words. And it's always due to the fact that they're picturing things and relating those things to each other. But how many of you guys were going house, table, planet, line, house, table, planet, line, house, table, planet? Probably a lot of you, right? And when I got to rose and refrigerator and monument, you're like, no, house, table, house, table, planet, line, right? So that's what's referred to as the primacy effect. So in combination with another effect, this primacy effect is the enhanced recall of information at the beginning of the list. So let's talk about, this is the key idea here with this first demonstration. The overall finding is called the serial position effect. And your graph, if I drew it in red here, looks something like this. You're around 81%. We got down into around 40%. We jumped back up to around 70%. If we actually use your real data, that's what the data would look like. So the primacy effect is this enhanced recall of information that is presented to you at the beginning of the list, and it occurs because of rehearsal. Okay? So I want you to understand for the serial position effect what each part is and why each part occurs. So the first part is called the primacy effect, and I'm telling you, it's the enhanced recall of information at the beginning of the list, and is due to the fact that you're rehearsing those words and you're saying them to yourself again and again and again, right? House, table, planet, line, house. As you guys set up above, Kelly and Lewis and Jennifer were repeating them to themselves. Perfect. That's primacy effect. When you recall the information at the end of the list pretty well, over here, we refer to that as the recency effect. Let me make that circle a little bit better, right? The recency effect is this enhanced recall of information from things at the end of the list, okay? And I didn't ask you to spontaneously tell me this, but usually what students tell me, when I remember band, basket, and towel pretty well, you'll say something like, that information is kind of fresh in my memory. Okay? You'll say something like, those were the last couple of words that I heard. That's why I remembered band, basket, and towel so well. Okay? So those two things in conjunction, the primacy effect up above and the recency effect down below, comprise what is referred to as the serial position effect. Okay? It has nothing to do with Frosted Flakes or Fruit Loops. The serial position effect has to do with the placement of items in a series. And what we're seeing here is that we're good at remembering the stuff at the beginning. We're good at remembering the stuff at the end. But look at those words in the middle, right? The words in the middle that I asked you guys about were rows and drawer. The middle two words are those 18 words. And our recollection there was down around 30-some to about 40%. Not very good at remembering the things in the middle. Really good at the stuff at the beginning. That's the primacy effect. Pretty good with the stuff at the end. There's a recency effect. We get this U-shaped curve. The U is tilted a little bit, admittedly, a little bit better for the primacy effect than the recency effect, but time after time after time, and I've been teaching this course For a dozen years now, and I've done this demonstration every single semester, I get this curve every single time, okay, because of the serial position effect. Any questions on either what the serial position effect is or why the primacy effect and recency effect work the way that they do? Does that make sense? Okay, let's do one more demonstration together. I'm going to clear the slide again. I'm going to ask you again to put down your pens and pencils or whatever you're writing with, whatever you're taking notes with, and let me read you a second list of words. And when I'm done with this list, I'll tell you what I want you guys to do. All right, here we go. List number 2, demonstration number 2, and I promise the final demonstration of the day. Here we go. Pickle, disc, lighter, pen, stable, highway, mountain, out, tire, ash, handle, sink, pool, play, apple, bird, fence, chair. Okay, now, before you write the words down, I would like you to count out loud with me backwards from the number 30. Ready? Begin. 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now I will give you a minute to try to recall as many of those 18 words as you can. So good luck with that. All right, guys. Now time is up. I'm going to show you the list. That's okay, Kelly. I'm going to open up the chat again so you can give me a total, and here is the list. All right. Pickle, disc, lighter, all the way through pool, apple, bird, fence, chair, and play. And I actually accidentally said play up here. So the last 3 words were actually bird, fence, and chair because I goofed up. I was reading through the list of words. So first of all, we're seeing significantly lower numbers overall pouring into the chat box. How many you got out of 18 here, right? A lot of single digits. April had, 14 last time? I see April with 10 this time, so the donuts and french fries don't always help you, apparently. Let's let a couple more folks chime in, and then we'll talk about what this one's all about. So single digits more often than not. Okay, so last time we said, hey, you know what? Pickle, disc, and lighter we're really good at. That's the primacy effect because we're rehearsing those items, okay? Pickle, disc, lighter, pen, pickle, disc, lighter, pen, etc., okay? The last three words we said was the recency effect. Those things were fresh in memory. Okay. What was going on this time that might have had a negative impact on these last three words? Bird, fence, and chair. What happened after I got done reading you the list of words? I had to count down, and that's going to mess up, as Andrew's saying, the short-term memory. That stuff that's fresh, right? From this previous slide, we said, hey, we're pretty good at this stuff at the end. This recency effect is due to this stuff being fresh in our short-term or our working memory. Well, this second demonstration, if I were to ask you to give me some data, I'm pretty sure that what's going to happen is your graph, which initially, I'll draw it in red, for you guys looks something like this. 80 down to 40, and then back up into this range. Now I'll draw it in blue. It's probably going to look something more like this, where it's coming over here, and then it's staying flat. Okay. What happens with this second demonstration is that the recency effect is not evident if there is a delay and or interference, or as Andrew said down below, short-term memory gets messed up. That's a fine way to describe it. Okay, the recency effect is attenuated or completely deleted effectively by the delay and or interference. And in fact, what I did with you guys was both a delay and interference. The delay was the fact that there was 30 seconds between the end of the list and when I asked you to try to recall those items. And the interference was that during those 30 seconds, you were counting backwards out loud from 30, or you should have been. And that's going to impair your recollection of those last three words, bird, fence, and chair. Okay? So we get more of an L-shaped curve. I guess the second demonstration here results in more of an L-shaped curve, whereas the first demonstration in red here gives us this more U-shaped curve, right? High on the left, a little bit lower on the right, but more of a tipped U-shape, whereas now the blue one gives us this more L-shaped curve. Still pretty good at those words at the beginning of the list over here, not very good in the middle, and actually then equally not as good at the end. Those words in the recency effect are knocked out because they're not as fresh as they were before. Okay, that limited capacity of short-term memory is running up against a challenge there when we do that delay with interference. Okay, let me stop there for a second. Questions on that second demonstration and what that was all about? So we're going to end up doing two more demonstrations tomorrow. I want you to understand what each of them is all about. So the first one today was to show us that this primacy effect and recency effect comprise this thing that we call overall the serial position effect. The second demonstration was basically to show you that you could eliminate this recency effect if you were to do that delay with interference. Okay, those are the first two demonstrations. The third demonstration that we'll do is going to be at the beginning of class tomorrow, when we're going to answer this question on the side here, about how many pieces of information can a person remember, right? Some people remember more than others, and you guys shared with us in the chat box there some of your strategies for trying to enhance your memory, right? I'm picturing different things that are related to each other. I'm trying to tie these things together in such a way as to be able to make sense. I'm relating images to each other as we work our way through this list. Okay. Tomorrow we're going to describe for you and I think neatly drive home the point that we have a limited capacity in our short-term or working memory. Remember this modal memory slide here. We said working memory includes short-term memory and has a limited capacity. Tomorrow I'm going to give you a number. Okay. By the time we're done doing that third demonstration, we're going to talk about a number, a range for the typical capacity of short-term memory. Okay, that will be our focus at the beginning of class tomorrow. All right, any questions from today about memory as we moved into these different models and got a couple of demonstrations? That was pretty good. That was pretty fun, right? We got two more demonstrations tomorrow, one about the capacity of short-term memory and then another one about other factors that influence memory. What else determines whether we are or are not likely to remember something. Okay, so that's where we'll go at the beginning. We will easily get through the rest of memory because I know where we're at right now. When I finish up memory, from where we're starting off tomorrow. That typically takes me about 75 minutes. Well, we have 100 minutes for class, so we'll easily get it done. And maybe even we might even do a quick jump into the beginning of the next section as we move into what is up next, intelligence. Or maybe we'll just stop early tomorrow. We'll see. Okay? Any final questions or comments on anything from today? Question just came in the chat box about improving memory. I would point you to the end of the section on memory. So they've got some ideas there about improving memory, and specifically with respect to studying, which is most relevant to you guys. So check out pages 364 and 365 regarding ways to improve memory. Okay? Good. Any other questions? All right, that'll do it, guys. It's 12:06 now. I'll hang out till 12:15 or so if there are additional questions. If not, you guys can take off, and I'll see you back in here tomorrow morning at 10:30 again. Bye, guys. Thank you.